Night falls over the great house. Within, troubled thoughts are interrupted by the distant wailing of what some believe are the restless spirits of the widows who keep vigil at the edge of the high cliff, eternally weeping for their lost husbands. Late into the night, their keening can be heard, which of course can only mean that there will soon be terror at Collinwood. Welcome to Terror at Collinwood. I am your hostess, Danielle, the accursed doppelganger of Penny Dreadful. And before we get started with today's show featuring the wonderful Patrick McCray and our discussion about the new Dark Shadows Daybook Unbound, which I'll put a link to in the show notes. You should definitely grab the Kindle version, and the hard copy will be coming out soon. It's available now on Amazon. We'll be talking all about the Dark Shadows Daybook Unbound, but there are a lot of other things I want to tell you about before we get to that. A lot of cool things that are available, interesting things happening. First of all, Night is Falling Volume 1, the graphic novel, being kickstarted right now. There's a Kickstarter campaign going on, and the delightful Barry and Karen Dodd, who are passionate creators, are the masterminds behind this great comic book. Night is Falling is described as Scooby-Doo meets Salem's Lot in this spooky tale set in 1970s New England. I met Barry and Karen a while back over at the Coast City Comic Con. Barry was the moderator for the panel with Sharon Smith-Lentz, who played Sarah Collins in Dark Shadows. And of course, Barry directed the short film On a Country Road, which starred Sharon. And I got to hang out with Barry and Karen and spend more time with them at Seaview Terrace over at Collinwood back in October, and they were kind enough to give me issue 1 of their amazingly cool comic. Night is Falling. Be sure to support their Kickstarter campaign for the graphic novel release. Thus far, it looks like it's doing really well. If you are listening to this while the Kickstarter is going on, as of this recording, it is the end of January, but I think it's going to be going for the next 30 days or so. I'll put a link to their Facebook page and also to the Kickstarter in the show notes. More cool literature for you. The new edition of the Dracula book, from bestseller to media superstar by Donald F. Glut, is now available. And of course, you heard the legendary Donald Glut here on this podcast. The things Don has seen and done, I mean, you can check out episode 31 of Terror at Collinwood to hear my conversation with Donald F. Glut, who has some really cool stories to tell. And the Dracula book was originally released in 1975. It's an Anne Radcliffe Award-winning book, and this is the new edition of the book, as an exhaustive and comprehensive and in-depth survey of the Dracula character as he appears throughout history and in all media to the present day. This book is without peer. Extremely detailed, well-researched, and generously illustrated with black and white photos, some quite rare, a landmark in documenting the horror genre. In addition, there is a 50-page author's afterword with dozens of additional, never-before-seen and rarely seen photos and posters, and there's even an admirable and well-thought-out attempt to untangle Angelique's complicated Dark Shadows timeline. Don is a big Dark Shadows fan, and he talks about Dark Shadows in the main body of the book, but in the afterword, he has a really interesting analysis of Angelique's timeline, which is, if you've watched Dark Shadows, is very complicated and can be difficult to understand. So Don actually writes a very compelling piece in his afterword where he looks at that. So I will post a link to the Amazon page in the show notes. And the exciting news continues. The National Arts Club celebrates the centenary of the birth of the world's most famous mime, Marcel Marceau, with an exhibition of photographs taken by Time Life photographer Ben Martin. The exhibit, which is open to the public and free, will take place from March 9th to April 28th in conjunction with the publication of a new edition of Marcel Marceau, Master of Mime, a photojournalist's view of the legendary artist as performer and friend. Catherine Lee Scott, Ben Martin's wife of many years and publishing partner until his death, dreamed of reissuing the book. She says, Marcel offered to write an introduction to a new edition, but passed away before we could make it happen. The dream was reawakened in early 2018 when I got in touch with Anne Sicko, Marcel's widow, and I apologize if I'm mispronouncing that. The two of us began discussing the possibility of an exhibit of the photographs in a new edition of the book to commemorate the centenary of Marcel's birth, March 22nd, 2023. For us, it's a tribute that honors the legacies of both men and their artistic collaboration. The National Arts Club is located at 15 Gramercy Park, South New York, New York. And I'll put a link to the National Arts Club in the show notes. And that's not all, folks. Daytime Gothic, you've heard me mention it before, and it's available right now. You can order it online. It's a full-color charity magazine celebrating Dark Shadows with 130 pages of features, interviews, rare photographs, artwork, fiction, and humor. Some of the highlights include Lara Parker relives a typical day on the set, Nancy Barrett recalls life as Carolyn Stoddard, Catherine Lee Scott pays tribute to co-star Mitch Ryan, Matthew Hall discusses his parents, Grayson and Sam Hall, sharing previously unpublished family photos. Eric Wallace, showrunner of The Flash, reveals how Dark Shadows taught him everything he needed to know about writing for TV. Mark B. Perry discusses Dark Shadows' reincarnation, his proposed revival series, how Barnabas Collins spoke to a generation of gay fans, the classic movies that made Dark Shadows, the saga of 2000's soap spin-off Port Charles, another soap that tried to recapture Dark Shadows' supernatural magic, and that was written by my friend Rachel Freitas, who you heard in episode 3 of this podcast. We discussed the Phoenix storyline, so congrats to Rachel. I look forward to reading your article, my dear. And we have a comic strip by Brett M. Herholtz. We have an article, The Unsung Heroes of Dark Shadows, and there's I believe there's a piece on Lego Dark Shadows, the Lego Collinwood drawing room and foyer by Madeline Marks, who I met at Seaview Terrace, and the Lego Collinwood is astounding, and all the little minifigures that represent each era of Dark Shadows must be seen to be believed, and I'm sure you will not be disappointed when you see that. And I wrote a piece for the zine as well, Gothic Steals for Fun, Profit, or Storyline Inspiration. It features 10 Gothic tales that could have been used in Dark Shadows had the series continued past April 1971. And there's much more than that. There's The House, which is some fan fiction. So I'm just looking quickly over the table of contents, and this looks absolutely sensational. Stuart, of course, is a professional graphic designer, professional writer, and he's done some incredible things in his career. And of course, he used to publish the Dark Shadows Journal fanzine in the UK. Lots of great stuff. You've heard the interview with Stuart on the podcast before, and it's the way it looks. This is like indistinguishable from something you would buy on a magazine stand. I'm sure it will be even superior to that. It looks absolutely fantastic. And best part, proceeds from Daytime Gothic will benefit Macmillan Cancer UK. It's edited by Stuart Manning. Format is full color, 16.5 by 24 centimeters, and perfect bound. So you're looking at a very slick, nice looking publication here, and for a good cause. So I will put a link in the show notes to the order page for the magazine. And last, but certainly not least, I received such a nice gift in the mail from Jeff Carlson at Maniac Monsters. Very thoughtfully sent me these really cool Barnabas pins and stickers, which I just absolutely love. I love stuff like this. I always say there should be more Dark Shadows merchandise out there. This is awesome. I love this kind of stuff. You can get yours as well as lots more amazing monster stuff like t-shirts, stickers, buttons, and more at mani-yakmonsters.com. I will post a link in the show notes. Thank you so much, Jeff, for sending this to me. I love this stuff. Jeff is an illustrator, so he designed all of these things that he has on his website. Great t-shirts, retro style stuff, like I love it. So thank you very much for that, Jeff. And I think that's all the news I have to offer. We had a lot today, but you're going to be hearing some more great news, and that's all about Dark Shadows Daybook Unbound with the one and only Patrick McCray. So stay tuned for that, because Patrick is my spectral guest tonight. There's nowhere to run, there's no place to hide. This podcast is fun, but there are spoilers inside. Welcome to Terror at Collinwood. 'Tis I, Danielle, aka Penny Dreadful, and I am very excited to welcome my guest today, returning to Terror at Collinwood to discuss his new Dark Shadows Daybook Unbound, and to just shoot the breeze with me because I miss him, is Rondo Award-winning writer Patrick McCray. In a feat worthy of the Guinness Book of World Records, Patrick once watched all 1,225 episodes of Dark Shadows in only 45 days. He's a member of the Collinwood Historical Society staff, and prior to earning his MFA in stage directing, Patrick helped launch Babylon 5 in the art department and was a comic book author for Revolutionary Comics, creating the underground cult hit Elvis Shrugged. He later wrote top-selling biographies of Betty White, Jack Dorsey, Britney Spears, and Elvis Presley. Having directed over 80 stage plays, he also co-produced and co-starred in the lauded audio series Star Trek: The Continuing Mission. He's been writing the Dark Shadows Daybook since 2016, winning the 2018 Rondo Award for Writer of the Year. As a webmaster, you can see his work at CatherineLeescott.com. Welcome back to the show, Patrick.
Thank you. It's worthy of Gilbert Gottfried.
the late great Gilbert Gottfried.
God bless him. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you. Good. Yeah, just keeping busy, hanging in there. Just plugging away at the podcast and busy doing back in classes, teaching my classes again. I'm teaching a couple of courses on Poe and Lovecraft, which should be pretty fun. So yeah.
Now, I will completely commandeer this and take this in the wrong direction. Have you seen this Netflix thing? This thing with Christian Bale?
I saw the trailer for it, but I haven't watched it yet. My sister started watching it and she digs it. Have you seen it?
I tried.
Yeah,
I like that Jeffrey Combs thing that they did on the horror Masters of Horror.
Oh yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and that was good enough for me.
Yeah,
unless you have Peter Lorre with wings at one point, it's not quite Poe.
Yeah, agreed. Peter Lorre is a necessary component, absolutely. But yeah, how about you? How are you? How have you been?
I'm fine. I'm exhausted.
With good reason.
We got the book out, and that's been really exciting. It was a much more fulfilling book in a lot of ways to put together than the first book, and I like the first book. And at the same time, I've been working on the audiobook, which is read by a brilliant reader named Mary Johnson. And if you want, I can get you a sample or something.
Oh,
she's
cool.
Hilarious. She's really funny, and it's kind of like a cross between NPR and SCTV, classic SCTV. Her approach.
I love that mashup. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Episode 922. When Amanda Harris has a long-delayed date with death, Julia learns that the best is yet to come. Werewolf, Alex Stevens. Grant Douglas investigates the Tate House, only to confront and promptly punch a werewolf. The werewolf flees and encounters Amanda Harris, who then confesses to Julia about her past. Spurred by Quentin in 1897 New York, on a really impressionistic bridge set. She tried to leap to her death after being greeted by an aging dandy named Mr. Best. Going unconscious, Amanda wakes up in a strange, otherworldly hotel lobby called the Stopping Off Place. Mr. Best agrees to keep her young until a day on which she is destined to die. She needs to find Quentin first. Decades later, she is still young. As she finishes telling all to Julia, a knock on the door reveals, you guessed it, Mr. Best. There is so much going on in episode 922 that you would need the combined powers of all of Craigslist to unpack it. I mean it. And it has more Zen implications than a Kung Fu reunion movie, right here. This minor storyline? Oh, this old thing, you ask? Why are you making a big deal out of that? Aren't we just waiting for Christopher Pennock to show up? Well, cosmically, we always are. But let's focus on Dark Shadows. Mr. Pennock will be glad that there will be actual, serious Zen material later in the article. But I gotta talk about my vampire stories first. This segment is easy to write off because it doesn't really feel connected to anything as important as the Barnabas, Josette, Angelique core story. It all kind of loiters at the beginning of a Leviathan storyline that will still be going on, bafflingly, months from now. Maybe it's easy to write it off because, while its story elements are more interesting than anything else going on, the show's treatment of them feels almost dismissive at best. Yes, I realize that they're in a hurry to get Quentin back, but once they do, they don't seem to know what to do with him. I mean it. But not here, in the stopping off place. Because here, dueling with Mr. Best, he has a purpose. And his immortality gives him the unique sparring partner that only an anthropomorphized death could really be. Unfortunately, this is almost a case of, what if someone gave a storyline and nobody showed up? Like the prior episode, Quentin, Chris, and the foppish android, this is a great idea, with so little airtime and arc impact that I have to remind myself that it happened. I need to consider this essay to be my permanent post-it. There's a huge question lurking in and around this episode, and that's, who's in charge? In a little over a year, we've met 3 contenders for the ultimate boss of evil in the DSU, and it can be debated which are the puppets and who is the hand. Bachelor number 1 runs an immense operation of punishment, demons, and gothic office furniture. He likes the music of J.S. Bach, blonde women, and dominating the world through an army descended from the union of reanimated cadavers. Give a sunny Burbank welcome to Diabolos. Bachelor number 2 is already hooked up, but looking for a third. He and his partner may be snakes in the grass, but that's only because these nature lovers predate time itself, and they wish to bring about the rebirth of an ageless serpent god to consume the planet. Heads of an immense secret cult of powerful publishers and ludicrous fur coat-wearing hipsters, get out the heat lamps for Oberon and Haza. Bachelor number 3 is the special guest star of this episode. A smooth-talking man about town, he loves fine suits, friendly wagers, and a view from the bridge. Drop in at his saloon, the stopping off place, and don't be in a hurry when you say hello to the original lady killer. Won't you find out why they all call him Mr. Best? Who actually runs Bartertown? I'd like to say that my money is on the caretaker, but I think I can build a more solid case for Mr. Best. Why? It's a process of elimination and of limits. Oberon and Haza are much like Diabolos. All 3 are obsessed with ruling the world. When you have an entire universe of planets to meddle with, wanting to rule these balding and squabbling apes seems a tad unambitious. I guess it's to get back at a god who displaced them. But who needs to rule existence anyway? The upkeep and insurance are outrageous, and don't even get me started on the utilities. As I shoulder all of that burden, does existence raise even a finger to help me? I think we both know the answer. All existence does is take perfectly good matter and turn it into energy, leaving me to spend half the morning turning it back into matter. And existence still doesn't even have the decency to come by once a week or so and watch an episode with me for the Daybook. Well, existence, you'll get yours. You gotta sleep sometime, and when you do, bang! Kobayashi Maru. That's my friend, Mr. Best. You know, your other binary half. Did I say half? I meant more than half. Death is the transition between being and nothingness, and he is the Lord of nothingness. Have you ever tried to take nothing away from him? Nothing. Not just the absence of something. Nope. Nothing. Nothing in a form we can't even conceive, because to do so would be to dignify it with a name, and once you describe it, it stops being nothing and becomes a thing. There you go, Mr. Best. Ruler of everything as it goes on to become something indescribable. So, what does he do? Well, he's the ruler of death, not time. He's not psychic. Now that matter exists, he might as well do a tad of wagering. On what? Amanda Harris. She wants to off it by jumping from a bridge. Well, Tay created her, so who knows if she'll die. But wait. By creating matter from only imagination, and from bending both matter and energy through paintings that transmute or bestow the effects of both matter and energy... Oh, man. Mr. Best isn't the most powerful being in the DSU anymore. I actually think it's Charles Delaware Tate. And he's still lost a babe to Quentin. Why? Because, as this episode demonstrates, Quentin can punch a werewolf right on the jaw. That's the important part. He lands the ladies because he knows all the werewolfian weaknesses. We can pontificate all we want, but we tuned in for a man punching a werewolf. A man punching a werewolf, we received. And that's how you get Capone.
Fantastic. Yeah. Oh, I look forward to that. Please, please let me know when that becomes available. So this is the original Daybook that is being the audio version that she's doing the audio reading for, which I have here.
She already finished it.
Oh, she finished.
She's doing the next book. She's doing Daybook Unbound. Yeah.
Holy mackerel. Wow, that's amazing. That's good. That's going to be quite the undertaking, because I was fortunate enough, thanks to Patrick, to get a preview, an advance copy of the Kindle edition of the book, and oh my goodness, 430 pages. Wow, that is truly epic. It really is, and it's magnificent. I've been just kind of poring over it and checking out some of the different entries. There's a wonderful foreword by Mark B. Perry, which I really enjoyed, and I am thoroughly enjoying your witty and very insightful entries. And for those who haven't read the original Dark Shadows Daybook, definitely get on that and check out the new one, because Patrick really he gets to the heart of Dark Shadows in a meaningful way, but with also a sense of fun. There's both heart and humor in your analyses of the different episodes and storylines, and beautiful tributes to some of the actors, those who've passed away, like Mitchell Ryan and Robert Rodin, and saying things like fans should have more gratitude kind of for Robert Rodin, or a debt of thanks, something. I'm not quoting it directly, but how what a difficult position he was put in to play that character, and how he really
Somebody's got to play this thing.
Yeah. And actually, I even pulled a quote from that. Adam, it's a strange mix of both representing these literary inspirations and moving beyond them. With regard to Dark Shadows, few of the show's riffs, though, come as close to the source material as did Adam. So it's safe to take a moment of license and admit that no other actor was ever given the chance to explore the world of Frankenstein's creation as Robert Rodin, which is a great observation. Absolutely accurate too. Yeah.
I mean, as much as we want to say wonderful things, and can say wonderful things about Boris Karloff, and what an actor!
Oh my God.
But his movies are like an hour long.
Mm-hmm.
He doesn't really have a chance to do a lot. He does a lot with the time that he has, but a fair test of Rodin really is to imagine what Karloff would have done if he had been given the role of Adam and had that much time, but he didn't. However, Rodin did, and you watch that performance, and he does everything. He gets to play every note, I think, on the keyboard of the emotional range in that. And it was one of those. There are Dark Shadows deaths. I mean, I dread them all, but there are some I dread more than others. And coming back to Rodin again and again, as I cycle through the Daybook every year, I am increasingly moved by his work and by what he's allowed to do. And I think people get annoyed because he kidnaps Carolyn. He doesn't do a lot, and he kind of grunts and waves his arms a lot. But that's just part of it, and he has to do it. In the words of James Whale, it's part of the ritual. However, everything else that he does, even his infant stuff, is just marvelously sensitive and surprising. It reminds me a lot of Sid Haig in Spider Baby.
Oh, right. Oh, sure, I can see that. Yeah.
I think Rodin did a terrific job, and I'm really sorry that they couldn't find parts for him in the ensemble as the series went on.
Yeah. They brought him back for those Big Finish audios as a different character, but as a revenant, Oswald Gravener, I remember. And it would have been cool if they had brought him back as Adam too, as Adam now, to see what Adam's up to these days, because I always see Adam as becoming, I know people want, like in the Sam Hall article, that you had the scars removed and all this, but I see Adam going in the same trajectory as the Frankenstein monster did, becoming even more intelligent, but also becoming more embittered by what he encounters in the world and how he's treated in the world. It's unfortunate, but that's just one of the quotes I pulled. But there are all kinds of really beautiful, just like in the first Daybook, really beautiful observations about the show. And I guess a lot of people have a tendency to, we were talking a little bit before the show started, you kind of go to these conventions sometimes and you meet people who are claimed, really big horror fans, etc. But you mentioned Dark Shadows, and some of them kind of look down their nose at it. And you illustrate very clearly why Dark Shadows is so important and just a beautiful work of art, and how it's, there are problems with technical problems and stuff like that, but to me, that's just part of it. It's just the creation of the show. That's part of what went into the creation of the show.
Did you see the movie Mighty Wind?
Oh, with the which is Christopher Guest. Christopher Guest. Yeah.
There's this scene in that where Bob Balaban, who's a very fussy guy who's putting this whole folk show together, is talking to the stage manager of the theater, and he's really freaking out because some of the scenery's 3D, some of the scenery is just painted 2D, and then he starts worrying about the microphones and everything else, and finally the stage manager says, yeah, that's fine, and that's a light, and that's a microphone, and we got to get started, and just slaps him in the back of the head. And that's sort of how I feel. It's like, there's a boom mic. Now you can choose to keep looking at that boom mic shadow, or you can choose to look at the brilliant actors who are under it, but they only had certain circumstances to do this. You do this show in something the size of a bowling alley and see how you do.
Yeah.
I was very lucky because when I was first introduced to Dark Shadows, I was surrounded by an incredibly hip group of slightly older people. I was in my teens, they were in their 20s, and they were like the sort of the brainy underachievers in Breaking Away, if you remember that movie. Just really bright guys. One of them runs Wonderfest now.
Oh.
And it is no longer an underachiever in any sense.
Dave Conover?
Dave Conover.
Yeah,
Dave
sure.
Conover,
Yeah.
crazy.
I know Dave. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, Dave was one of my great influences growing up.
Oh, awesome.
Yeah. I was like his Bucky.
Oh.
So, except I didn't spy on him changing, which is how Bucky learned that what was going on. Anyway, so they loved Dark Shadows, and they had a wonderful sense of humor about it. And as far as I was concerned, Dark Shadows was the hippest thing in the room. It was weird and retro, but it was hip. And then I moved away, and I was surrounded by other fans, especially as Mr. Whedon's work became the piece of the narrative. And I suddenly went through a desert, especially when I moved to Knoxville, of years of almost being afraid to mention Dark Shadows.
Wow.
Because you would get, oh my God, you would get attacked. You would be made fun of. It was really rough. And so I am continually finishing that argument with the Daybook. There's a lot of art and a lot of stuff comes from a place of pain. And it's okay to admit that. And yeah, the Daybook, if you start to look at it, deals a lot with solitude. It deals a lot with maybe things not being understood or maybe being read too much on the surface. And that's a way of processing a lot of that stuff.
Speaking of processing a lot of that stuff, when you watched every episode of Dark Shadows in such a short, compressed span of time, I mean, that's amazing. But what did you come away with in terms of like looking at the overall themes of the show versus somebody who would watch it like piecemeal here and there? Or
I would say I got an emotional sense of things that I've been struggling to articulate ever since. The two major takeaways. One, to out pretentious myself, which I may pull a muscle. There is a really Jungian quality to these characters that are played by a single actor, multiple characters played by a single actor. And I really feel like, it's kind of the thousand faces of the cosmic Gilligan. It is just all of the Nancy Barrett characters ultimately, I mean, we read that it's Nancy Barrett,
Yeah.
or it's thing we consider to be the Nancy Barrett, the John Carlin, the Joan Bennett. And these parts are just different masks that they wear here and there. And so what you get to do is you start to look at, don't ask me what they are, but you start to look at the commonalities of these different parts that take on different masks in different eras. And so with John Carlin and with Nancy Barrett, you see this great class disparity. And you see two young people full of impulsiveness and desire. And if you ignore the fact that their characters have different names and you simply watch their trajectory over the series, you're able to see the Loomis and the Carolyn unite.
Yeah.
And be the couple maybe they're supposed to be, and that Willie evolves. He actually becomes this intellectual hero. If you kind of think of it in a very broad way, if you look through your bad eye and go like this and just think of it as the same character, that's really something. So that was one thing. The idea of the Frid or the Parker or whatever.
Interesting. Yeah.
It's a powerful tool. The second thing is just this dead horse that I will beat until it's 6 feet under, which is the idea that this is one big story. And you get that when you watch the show in such a concentrated manner, because as in that terrible movie Superman Returns, there is that moment where he's hovering above the earth and his cape is flapping in the space breeze, and he's looking down and he can see the whole thing at once. And it's that thing that astronauts talk about seeing when they're on the moon, and they see the whole thing at once. And when you do it in that short a period of time, the beginning of the series is still very fresh in your mind when you see the end of the series.
Right.
And of course, the middle is in there also. And you just see it all at once, and you have this beautiful sense of emotional clarity about this as a living organic story.
Right. Excellent. Yeah. That said, do you, I know in the Daybook, the new Daybook Unbound, you do a write-up on the first episode of the series, the arrival of Victoria Winters. But then you also refer to that as the first episode of Shadows on the Wall, which is interesting. Yeah, could you elaborate?
Well, sure. Just today I was watching an episode. I think it was like 673 or something like that.
Yeah.
It's where David is ordered to kill Chris Jennings by Quentin, and he runs out. He doesn't want to do it.
Yeah.
And I'm looking at that episode. That episode begins with Barnabas locking Chris up in the mausoleum, and Chris saying, "Why are you treating me like this? Why are you trying to help me?" And Barnabas just, just a thing I do. And then it goes to Amy and David creeping out Mrs. Johnson.
Yeah.
She's got a great drunk's paranoia about him. I love it. She's so schmuck. And then they go up, they decide they're going to root around in Quentin's sock drawer, and Quentin's there and says, "Hey, here's some strychnine," and Amy goes running out, and so does David. And it's such an evocative episode, and the music seems so sad.
Oh, yeah.
And I remember seeing it when I was a young man, when I was about 16, and just how I felt like I was the mist on an iceberg of mystery that I would never really understand, but it was all real. And just how spooky and atmospheric and mysterious and paranoid and human and loving this entire episode is. Okay, that's Dark Shadows.
Yeah.
That's Dark. And they had to discover what Dark Shadows was. And if you look at what was created, where's Vicky? Where's Vicky in that? She's not there. And if you look at that early stuff, this is not a pilot for that show.
Mm-hmm.
In any sense, is it a pilot for that show? It's a pilot for a kind of, mystery pen thing, just a kind of pot boiler time spinning thing about an angry businessman who spent some time in jail.
But is it part of the overall story that that world, that whole looking at that world from that perspective, is that part of it?
No, it's not even good world building. Now, is it bad TV? No, it's good TV. It's great TV. I'm happy to watch the show that first episode introduces.
Okay.
However, I can also concede that it has very little to do with Dark Shadows. And to prove my point is the fact that for 30 years after the show went off the air, you had 30 years worth of new Dark Shadows fans who never
it's true.
saw it.
Yeah.
So it clearly didn't hurt them. I'm not saying it's bad. I'm not saying I dislike Vicki Winters or any of that. It just ain't the same show.
Okay. What about 1841 parallel time? Is that
that's a wonderful, wonderful counterpoint to that. It is more of Dark Shadows than that early part is. Okay. In fact, I would say it's a good course, and because at that point they had permission to be Dark Shadows. They knew what Dark Shadows was. They had permission to really go there with the supernatural and the menace, and they knew where the bread and butter was. So I would say, even though people didn't see that either for about 30 years, it's much closer to being Dark Shadows because it does the things we think of Dark Shadows.
The whole vibe. Would you say that Dark Shadows became Dark Shadows with Barnabas, the introduction of Barnabas, or with the Laura the Phoenix storyline? Well,
let me ask you a question.
Okay.
Dark Shadows was a success in syndication, right?
Yeah.
And it was a success on VHS.
Yeah.
And on DVD before The Beginning came out and all of that.
Yep.
But we didn't get around to any of that early stuff, including Laura the Phoenix, and it still did okay. So I would argue that yes, of course it begins with Barnabas as we really think of it. I mean, that's however, can it begin magnificently with Laura the Phoenix now that we have access to it? You bet. You bet. But it's still thematically, Barnabas is your main character. If you look at the most important decision made on the series, made by Angelique, at the end of the show. And so to reverse engineer it, everything goes back to that.
Yeah. And you had an excellent theory about Angelique, which I pulled that too. I'm just going to read this if you don't mind.
Oh, please.
This is the end of 1840, as you pointed out. Let me see here. In addition to writing lyrics for Joanna's theme, which I'm not going to spoil that, so people are going to have to wait for the Daybook Unbound to read Patrick's brilliant lyrics for Joanna's theme, which I loved. There's a great theory you have on Angelique. So it says, so in terms of her grand transformation, what if Angelique is making it all up? Or some of it up. After all, she's always been perfectly happy to use her powers to influence Barnabas's decisions. How he came about loving her was always less relevant than the fact that he simply did. No love spells on him. She simply mastered the fine art of influence. Faking her own death is the longest but strongest game possible. Had the 1971 primary time storyline happened, it might very well have seen Barnabas exploring the timeline in pursuit of Angelique. At last, she would be desired and sought on a level to rival Josette. At last, he would have her right where she wants him. It's just an interpretation, just a what if, true believers. Yes, a bleakly cynical one of multi-level manipulation, but you have met Angelique, right? Or maybe it's just preferable to the idea that she's gone, which I love that. That's a great way to end that. Really cool theory, that Angelique faked the whole thing as just another, and if the show had continued, I mean, guaranteed we would have seen Angelique. She died in 1840. Yeah, right. How many times has Angelique died, right? So I think yeah, you might be onto something there. That's a very interesting theory.
So we have no idea what happens right after he gets back in 1971. She might be there with Alan Funt, waiting to, hey, Barnabas, guess what? Guess what? Just kidding. Julia's in on it, and so Stokes.
Yeah.
The whole thing. Here's Jerry Lacey. He's actually trashed the whole time. He's just an actor. Very funny writer in the future. So yeah, that was a last minute theory I had. That's one of the more recent pieces, and that's the thing about this book, is that it's much more, for the most part, it's more recent stuff that I was doing while the first Daybook was locked down. And every time something good happens, then I feel like I have to earn it, and so I kind of start working harder and harder and harder. And so after Wallace said, "Hey, let's do the Daybook," then I feel like my pieces got much better, but I couldn't put them in. And that was one of them. I had written very sentimental stuff, very emotional stuff. I had a very emotional situation when I did the watch through with 1198, but always about 1198. And by the way, yesterday was the 52nd anniversary of 1198 being filmed.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, of Angelique's death.
Yeah.
But I had written very sentimentally again and again and again. And, sentiment is exhausting. and after a while of being forced to mourn these characters, a conspiracy theorist begins to emerge in one's mind. And I felt kind of bad because I wanted to write something really sort of gut punchy, emotional, and no, this sort of cynical thing came out. But it's cynicism that also has a strange optimism to it, because it's a way for me to kind of come up with a way that she might not be dead. And I like that.
Yeah.
And it's funny because that last line that you quoted is not in the Daybook as it appeared online.
Oh, really?
No, I put that in very, very, very recently.
Oh,
in fact, maybe just a week or two ago.
Oh, no kidding. Wow.
The ending of this book is probably earlier than you want to talk about it, so I won't say that much. But creating some sort of emotional catharsis was very important to me. And I thought that was a rotten line. Then, yeah, I've met Angelique, haven't you? That's fine for a column, but for a book where that's ending the main examination of the series, I thought, no, I just can't do that to myself. I don't want to read that.
Yeah.
And I want to give readers something more.
I think you also get to the heart of something else that when I had Lara Parker on the show, she talked about how there's a sort of a deep, you look at Dark Shadows and say, well, there's no real moral sense because the heroes of the show are murdering people and all of this, but there is this desire for for them to strive to be better, all of them. And she pointed that out too, that all the villains in the show, it's true, the monsters of the show, the villains of the show that start out that you think, like Barnabas and even Angelique ultimately, and Quentin too, you see them do these pretty horrible things, but they ultimately strive to be better. I don't know, I see that you point that out quite a few, that type of thing out in your write-ups as well.
It's the same thing with Jeb.
Yeah, Jeb too. Yeah, correct. Yeah.
It's that love will come in and mess you up and make you a good person no matter what. And the thing that's really impressive is not only the redemptive power of love, but when you talk about Angelique and Barnabas and the morality surrounding them, that's something I've contended with for a long time. And ultimately, it's sort of a frighteningly fascistic line of argument that you have to make, because, they are not as others. Their lifespans are on a much longer continuum. And in fact, I think there's something in the new Daybook about this. I finally was able to put it in very few words, which I'll fail at today. But the idea is that if they are atoning for the really rotten things that they did, especially early on, Sarah, Naomi, all of that stuff. Who's left to forgive them after a while?
Mm-hmm.
They're all dead. You know, and forgiveness and atonement and so on and so forth really is only salient when directly injured parties are there to receive reparations.
Mm-hmm.
And or the descendants who have been directly affected,
Yeah.
you know, atone to them. However, those people are gone. And so the only people that you can really atone to are each other.
Mm-hmm.
And you're cursed to live. You're a godlike being. So really mortal standards of, you know, mortals, they have an easy time of it. They don't have the responsibility of saving this or that. They're short timers. They're out of here. And that's kind of nice. You know, they don't deal with the existential dread of being trapped in a coffin for 173 years. And the less glamorous aspects of this life. And so your standards of morality change a bit. However, what do we as humans take away from that? Well, what we as humans take away from that is that atonement is salient under certain circumstances. But after a while, just be a better person.
The period of time in which Dark Shadows became popular, it was a time of two things. You know, we had this youth counterculture going on, and we also had monster kid craze. The monster craze was happening with kids. You know, they were obsessed with monsters, and you had this whole counterculture going on. And Dark Shadows, I think, as far as pop culture and genre television, and just in general, in terms of sort of the gothic genre, the supernatural characters, the characters that were traditionally the ones who are the ones that must be destroyed, sort of thing, and threatening the living, they become the protagonists of the show. And I have to wonder if that was because of the culture at the time. I assume that that's because I don't think we ever saw anything like that before, and we see it all the time now. It's just taken for granted when you see these TV shows like you mentioned, Buffy, like that, like Angel, you know, something like that, or True Blood, or Sabrina, or things like the Sabrina, the Chilling Adventures of Sabrina, all of this kind of stuff where these supernatural characters are the heroes of the show. Dark Shadows did it first, as far as I'm aware.
Well, they did. I hate to say it, Munsters and Addams Family.
Oh, sure, yeah.
Did.
In terms of comedy,
But,
in terms of comedy.
Yeah. But that narrative had been created a little bit, but it wasn't terribly political. Mm-hmm. Not to the extent that Dark Shadows was political. And yeah, you have an era of rebels, and who are the greatest rebels of all? Misunderstood monsters. And really, with the exception of Dracula, and Dan Curtis fixed that, with the exception of Dracula, all of those universal monsters are kind of misunderstood.
Sure.
You know, even the Mummy got a raw deal in his love life. The Creature from the Black Lagoon, of course, very misunderstood. The Wolfman, completely misunderstood, or understood, but it's just sad for Larry Talbot. Yeah. And so if you round that out with Dracula, and if you suddenly invent a reason why Dracula is Dracula, and that it's full of remorse, and it was for love, and so on and so forth, suddenly you have the greatest rebels of the 20th century, mm-hmm. all assembled. You know, mm-hmm. It's House of Curtis.
Yeah, absolutely. I love it. House of Curtis. That should be the title of your next book, House of Curtis.
I'd be happy to. It sounds good to me.
So for the Daybook, the new Daybook, can you tell us a little bit of what we can expect in terms of what were the challenges in terms of doing this second book versus the first one?
One of the challenges was the fact that I covered a lot of the real fun stuff in the first book. Uh-huh. And so some of those highlights, just you got to read the first book. However, this takes everything else and it looks at it in a greater depth. I think that the pieces are better. On one hand, they're a little deeper. On the other hand, they're also a little looser. I had developed a lot more confidence as a writer, and so they're more playful in places. They're more improvisational in places. I'm not exhausting myself as much to sound profound, as I did in the pieces in the first book. They're more mature. That's really abstract, but I think you get that in the reading, though. I'm very proud of this one. I don't get proud of my own stuff very often. So that's number one. Number two is a great introduction by Mark Perry. Number three, as I had finished the book and was just kind of, polishing it and putting in a few more typos, I watched episode 364. And it's the one where Sarah finally appears to Barnabas. I could write a book about that one episode. And in fact, I think I got 2 essays out of it. One at the beginning, which I call a forward conclusion. Yeah. And then I think one towards the end, or maybe in the middle or something. I don't know. It's all a blur.
I did read the forward conclusion. Yeah. Yep.
And for me, that's a Rosetta Stone for a lot of the show. And so that was really exciting. Mark Perry and I were talking about what his introduction was going to be. And I was at a Christmas party that I was trying to avoid. And suddenly I was thinking about 364, which I'd seen that morning, and it struck me. And so I just went over into a corner and wrote it. And so we have that, which for me is kind of, at least right now, a Rosetta Stone for the show. You have a lot more, I don't call them obituaries, but memorials for actors, which I really enjoy writing. I think they what I try to do, I don't know if I'm successful, what I try to do is articulate why these people probably matter to, they do matter to fans, but why I suspect they matter to fans. And there was one naughty thing I did, and I really tried to do penance in this. And that was, I said long ago on a podcast, I said a rotten thing about Jeffrey Scott. And I have felt awful about that ever since. And so I really, really, really am happy that his memorial is in there, because he himself admitted what his shortcomings were on the show. And I wanted to do him justice. Not a lot of these guys, although they deserve it, get qualitative memorials after they pass away. They get something in Variety that's, like a couple of paragraphs about what they did, and then that's it. Nobody talks about their impact the way that they should. And so, maybe somebody will read this and that will matter to them. And I love that. When I wrote the Ben Cross obituary, which is in there, I got a letter from Ben Cross's daughter.
Oh, that's wonderful. Because it was posted on the Collinsport Historical Society website as well. Because a lot of these entries originated at the Collinsport Historical Society, and then you redid them for the book. Yeah. Just to clarify for people.
She was very complimentary.
Yeah.
And that made me realize, these people have kids and they might be reading these things. And as someone who has a lot of bereavement issues, I've been to a lot more funerals than I have weddings. I know the value of something like that. And so I'm not going to say I do a good job at it, but at least I'm out there doing something. And
it's fantastic. Beautiful. Yeah.
And feel good. So there's that. There are extra essays, some of them just about the essays, but then there are a few others where I'm able to do, a few tributes here and there. I wrote about an experience I had with Roger Davis at the 50th anniversary convention, who's a very controversial figure. My experience with him has been very positive. And so there's a lot of extra stuff. And the part that really mattered to me was the end, because I feel like I did okay with the end of the first Daybook, but I don't assume, talking about bereavement issues, I don't assume I'm going to be around, tomorrow. I don't know. I have my mother died when she was 64. I'm 51. I don't know what's going to happen. And so anytime I approach something like this, I approach it with the thought of, well, if I have a heart attack, on my way to the refrigerator, and this is it going to be valuable to people? And so I wasn't really thrilled with the ending in the first Daybook. And in this case, I had a bunch of disparate stuff. Gordon Dymowski was very helpful in helping me structure it. And I feel like I might have arrived at something that will be cathartic for fans, and that would make me really happy. This could just be a book of essays, there's catty stuff some guy said about a show, and certainly it's that. I don't want to disappoint, but but I remember as I added that last part, that afterword, and I put the memorials before the other essays, the Christmas Carol and then the 1991 Dark Shadows, I really felt something emotional, which I never had before with my writing, and I felt good enough to put the words "the end."
Yeah,
which doesn't mean I'm not going to write any more daybooks.
No.
I don't know, but I felt like it was cosmically appropriate.
Yeah. Now,
And
are you talking about the afterword? The afterword?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that was a really cool idea. And I don't know if you want to elaborate on it or wait till people get the book so that they can see what you're talking about. But it was a really fascinating and I thought it was a great way to end the book because, yeah. Oh, do you want to elaborate on what you did there?
I'd be happy to. It was completely accidental. And that was last minute. That was late December. And I was in a conversation with Mark Perry about the how dramatic the making of the show was. And like Lucy attempting to always get into Ricky's show, I'm always trying wacky stunts to get people's attention. So, I can do something more. And so we were talking, and and he said, gosh, that show, the making of it would be really interesting. He started talking about the show, The Offer, about the making of The Godfather. And suddenly I had this vision, and it was this Paul Thomas Anderson style montage at the end of like the end of Magnolia or something, that would show, if we did an 8-episode miniseries about the making of Dark Shadows, that would show where everyone went. And I had tremendous emotional clarity about how I felt about some of these people that I had never thought about before. But when I put them in an artistic kind of bent, and I thought of them as characters as well, suddenly a very clear narrative popped into my mind. And so I wrote this writing sample. I wrote this dramatic writing sample, this spec script of just describing what that montage that would end the show would be. And it was terrific. I sent it to him and he liked it. And then I thought, gosh, what if I put that at the end?
Yeah.
And it just really felt nice.
Yeah, it worked. It worked. It was a great capper for the book because I think fans of Dark Shadows tend to be just as fascinated with how the show was made as they are with the show itself, with the content itself, because it is a fascinating story, and it's incredible that it actually exists, that they were able to actually do what they did under the constraints that they were dealing with. I mean, it's just absolutely remarkable that they pulled that off, and just the creativity and what went into it, and just the frenetic pace with which it was created. The Lucy, I Love Lucy conveyor belts with the chocolates with Lucy, perfect analogy there. Absolutely. Yeah. And you mentioned that you talk about things in this book like the 91 series, like you're going into the 91 series, which was really interesting to read about as well. I pulled another quote here to touch on the 91 show, your summation of the 91 revival show, which I have to rewatch. I haven't watched it since I watched it when it aired, and then I got the MPI tapes. MPI released the series on VHS as well at that time, and I have the DVDs, but one day I need to sit down and rewatch that. But I love how you end this. You say, if Dark Shadows 1991 failed to be a show with numbers demanding a second season, and if it falls short of being the late 80s music video nightmare we might have gotten, that might have gotten all the gang talking at the sock hop, it doesn't matter. It sustains its half season with a unique, compelling, and headstrong voice that doesn't need to ask for anyone's approval. Dan Curtis's braggadocio may have created a strangely anachronistic show, but given the nature of its lead character, that may have been the most loyal choice possible. That's a really great observation. I think you nailed it there. That's for sure. Absolutely. I remember enjoying the 91 series when I watched it. I haven't.
Oh,
Yeah, I haven't rewatched it since then, but I look, my heart belongs to the original series, but I also definitely give a nod to the 91 show too.
Yeah, I think it's possible to watch them with no conflict, especially because the 91 series was a flop.
Yeah.
So, you know, 13 hours is sort of an indulgence, and you kind of rub its head and say, "Oh, look at you, you're cute in your turtleneck," and it does some really cool stuff. So it is for the series what it is in the book, just this kind of wacky epilogue. Sort of episode of What If. It's just another parallel. It's like the movies. It's another parallel time.
Yeah, that's how I see it too. Yeah, that's how I see it too. I'll have to revisit it. I remember having some issues with it, but there were things I liked. I liked that Dan Curtis did a gothic tale instead of, like you described, 80s nightmare music video. And trying to get with the times and make it. I mean, they did do some of that. Hairdo. Yeah, they did a little bit of that. I mean, I think
a little bit.
I think Ben,
not as much as you might think.
Right. Yep. Exactly.
They really they should have kept Barnabas in a suit.
I agree. Turtlenecks. Totally, 100% agree.
Turtlenecks.
Yep. I'm all in. I didn't like that. Yeah, I was like, Barnabas doesn't belong in a turtleneck. He needs to be in the suit. You got to keep him in the suit. He would
feel like a convict.
Yeah.
He would say, "Willie, why are you dressing me like a convict? What did I do to you that you should dress me in this casual nightmare? I'm in a sock. I'm in a giant sock. Willie, thank you. And it stinks of Paco Rabanne. Where did you get this?"
Yes. Agree. That's why I love Alec Newman as an actor, but that 2004 pilot, I'm like, why is he wearing that? He just...
The essence of Barnabas, the thing that's so magnificent about Barnabas is his fish out of waterdom.
Yep.
But not the way Johnny did it. It's not Austin Powers 4, because the beauty is that he just, with Willie's help, he just kind of fits in enough that he's like a nerdy Benny Hill character who buys a swingers outfit and shows up at a party and tries to look like he's really with it. Right. And he's just kind of a little off.
Yeah.
And that's the hilarious. When I say Dark Shadows is a comedy, I got into some argument with somebody online about this the other day. When I say Dark Shadows is a comedy, it's for those reasons.
I mean, I see there are a lot of humorous things in Dark Shadows, like anything Louis Edmonds says immediately elicits a smile from me, or a laugh, or Count Petofi. One of my favorite scenes in 1897 is, Count Petofi walks in and Quentin confronts him and says something to the effect of, "My nephew's dying, my brother's a madman, my so-and-so's possessed," and just listing off all these horrendous things that Count Petofi has done, and Petofi casually says, "Oh, stop worrying about your family." Pansy Faye, just Pansy and Carl. I want a spin-off series for Pansy and Carl. Just there is humor in Dark Shadows, but it's not done at the expense of the drama and the mystery and the suspense. It's part.
No, you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. It's and you got 450 hours. So you got plenty of time for it to be a comedy. You have plenty of time for it to be a drama, to be horror, to be romance, to be everything. It's like the Bond movies. People ask me who my favorite Bond is, and I say, well, it just depends on my mood. It's Dark Shadows, the same thing.
Yeah. Yep. I want to ask you some like super geeky. I mean, I guess this whole conversation has been geeky questions, but I do want to get into that. But before we do that, I want to just any closing thoughts on the Daybook itself, the Daybook Unbound, where people can get it, and your partner in crime, Wallace McBride, of course, was involved in this, and he very kindly lets me post the Terror at Collinwood episodes over on the Collinsport Historical Society on Facebook, so I really appreciate that. But any info that people should know about. Yeah.
Wallace, the Orson Welles to my frozen peas. Wallace is currently putting the art in the book for print. Wallace is building that, and this all the early Kindle release has to do with this weird scheme I worked out to get a free PDF typeset copy from Amazon. It all has to do with how you can build these things now within Amazon's own app, which is fantastic. And if you want to write a book, get this app, the Kindle Create app. It makes it very easy. So we had a date for maybe the release, and life gets in the way, and so he's putting extra fabulousness into it, and that really doesn't work with Kindle because it constantly has to reformat itself, and
see.
His meticulous typesetting doesn't really matter. So for a Kindle version, so the Kindle version, there's no reason why it couldn't come out, and it had to at some point, and it sort of is a preview really for the print version.
Yeah.
And so that explains sort of the bifurcated release. Now, I don't know quite when the art's going to be in there. I mean, he's doing it right now, so I suspect we're going to see this out before Walpurgisnacht.
Oh, great, perfect.
On April 30th, I'm imagining, maybe
good
before.
timing. Yeah.
Yeah, and he can, and we can definitely plug in a lot of the stuff into the old template. So because we want it to have a visual consistency with the first book. So and right now you can get the Kindle version, strangely enough, on Amazon. If you are a Kindle Unlimited subscriber, it's free. Just read all the way through, because that's how I get paid. It's this weird thing where you get paid based on how many pages people read.
No kidding, really?
It's a real whack. Yeah, it's because they take all the money that Kindle Unlimited subscribers put in every month.
Okay.
They divide that amongst the authors. They divide it further by how many books were downloaded and then how many pages in those books got read.
Okay.
So,
wow.
However, there is a Penny Dreadful special for at least, yes, that started now. And it runs until this podcast has been out for at least a day. It's the Penny Dreadful special. And for 99 Penny Dreadfuls, for 99 cents from now, out of gratitude for the wonderful things that you do, and as a way for me with the Dark Shadows community to thank you for what you do, your readers, meaning all Dark Shadows fans, can get the Daybook, get the Daybook Unbound for 99 cents.
That is awesome.
They can get it now for 99 cents for at least a day after this is out. And that's already begun.
You heard it here. So as of when this episode is posted, 24 hours, they can get it 99 cents, the Penny Dreadful special. I'm honored. Thank you for doing that. Thank you. And for all of the things that you and Wallace have done for Dark Shadows and for the Dark Shadows community. I am extremely grateful, because you guys, I mean, over the years have just been unbelievable. I mean, like I said, you're a machine. When I was texting with you, I said, you're a machine. I don't know how you do it, but you and Wallace together, what a force of nature. Like over the years, all the articles and really cool. You've helped. I think you said the first time you were on the podcast that part of doing this was to illustrate to people why Dark Shadows is cool, not to make Dark Shadows look cool. It already is cool. You were demonstrating why Dark Shadows is cool, and a lot of that through the website in the internet generation, because I'm very grateful to the founders of the Dark Shadows fandom as well for the fanzines and all of the stuff, the festivals, all of that too. But you guys in the sort of the internet age have, and of course Stuart Manning too with the Dark Shadows news page. But you guys with the meme, like just the memes that Wallace would make that I would see flying all over social media, and great articles, write-ups, interviews, all kinds of really cool things, and presented in a visually compelling and fun way that was entertaining for people that are just scrolling through on their phones and stuff and looking online. So it's really an amazing thing that you guys have done, and you've been awarded with Rondo Awards, which were well deserved, the two of you guys. So thank you for everything you have done for the Dark Shadows fandom.
It's my pleasure. And so we're wrapping this up, right?
Pretty soon. I want to ask you a couple of geeky questions.
Okay, good. And then I've got a treat. Yeah. Okay. Let's go. What do we got?
Okay. So I want to ask you some questions. One thing that came to mind when you were talking earlier. Okay. You're like I always say Patrick McCray is like the Fonz of Dark Shadows podcasts, because remember the Fonz would show up on Laverne and Shirley sometimes, or on Mork and Mindy, or whatever. Joni Loves Chachi. I think it was even on Sesame Street one time. But so Patrick, I see Patrick on all these podcasts talking about plot stuff with regard to Dark Shadows and really cool theories that you come up with. I've seen a resident of Collinwood and the Between the Shadows, Jewel, Karen, Kristen. I've seen you on there's a new one on Twitter, Deep Shadows. I was tagged in. I was like, hey, Patrick's on this Deep Shadows on Twitter. This is interesting. So I listened to it. It was really cool.
What was that?
What?
I don't remember that.
Yeah.
I'm thrilled. Right?
No,
I have lots of memory.
You were, yeah. It was. They were talking about from a literary perspective, like you're talking about books and say how Dan Curtis was a fan of of New England's fishing.
I just showed up. I was like Bob Hope filming.
Really, you just walked in, you crashed the party.
Yeah. They had this thing on Twitter, they had these listening parties on Twitter or something. I thought, hell, there's Don's on that. I'll show up.
Awesome.
So yeah, I just was killing time.
Yeah. I was like, I got tagged. Somebody tagged me, and I was like, oh, this is cool. And they have all these episodes. I was like, wait, Patrick's over here in this episode. And of course, you were in the Collinsport Historical Society podcast. So, I want to ask you, okay, so you brought up Quentin poisoning Chris Jennings. Now, I have some thoughts on this, but why do you think Quentin wanted to poison Chris Jennings?
Because he thought he'd think it was funny.
That is very much in line with Quentin Collins, so maybe so.
I think, okay, so a couple of things. One, we don't know that this is the ghost of Quentin.
Mm-hmm.
It could be somebody else.
You've put that forward before, put Patofi, right?
No, I think
Judah Zachary.
Judah Zachary, yeah, it's his first effort to kind of mess with the house and to get people in a bad mood, because he knows Quentin Collins is going to be showing up, and that's one of the few forces that could really give him a hard time. Mm-hmm. But okay, let's say it is the ghost of Quentin. Because we're already in this whole thing about he loves Jameson, so he will kill his identical great grandson. It's just so weird. It's like Doc Savage having a twin cousin. but my theory is that he feels sorry for Chris, and he wants to end the line.
Mm-hmm.
So before Chris can have a werewolf child or whatever, he's trying to put Chris out of his misery.
Yeah. Yep.
By messing with the mind of a young boy and turning a child into a murderer, which is how these things are done.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
Quentin has so much power, and yet he wants to do this other thing. Mm-hmm. I think if it is the ghost of Quentin, that the ghost of Quentin's kind of insane,
mm-hmm.
and that the ghost of Quentin, it's taking a lot of energy for him to influence David, and I think he's non-compos mentis. I don't think he's all there, because you think he died and he's had to let his energy build up more and more and more and more until he could finally spark the telephone and get David in there and have the right person at the right time. And he's still, I don't think it's until he kicks everybody out of the house that he is really at his full power. And here he's gloating that he has them gone and that the house is his. Take that, Judith.
Yeah. I love it. I agree with you. I think he was trying to end the line, but I think he inadvertently, my feeling is, because we see, they never really explain when Barnabas goes to let Chris out of the mausoleum, the secret room in the mausoleum in the morning, he's still a werewolf. He has not reverted. And there was a line during the Leviathan storyline where Bruno wanted to kill the werewolf while he was in human form, and Jeb Hawk said, no, if you kill him while he's in human form, that will turn him into the animal forever. And I wonder if if Jeb is correct, maybe Quentin off camera succeeded in killing Chris, and that's what caused him to become a werewolf permanently and not transform back, because they don't really explain why he's, why he doesn't. Part of going back to 1897, Barnabas is trying to save David's life, but he also is trying to save Chris. Remember, Chris is trapped in the secret room of the mausoleum, and he's a werewolf. He has not changed back. So I wonder if maybe Jeb was right, and maybe Quentin did succeed in killing Chris after all. I don't know.
It could be, but we're now positing that Jeb and Bruno Hess are the Richard Attenborough of this kind of nature, and they're not the first. If Elliot Stokes says it, okay. If the hairdo twins say it,
well, but the werewolves are the enemies of the Leviathans. So, although Jeb is not really up to speed on the book, he doesn't seem to care.
How did that happen?
Yes.
How do you have a race of primordial snake gods that pre-exist time and the earth and everything else, but they got a problem with a guy who turns into a wolf once a month?
I listened to the episode I did with Rick Lay and Stephen Mark Rainey. Rick Lay pulls out the Robert E. Howard pulp info on that and actually presents some precedent for that. He totally does. It's amazing. Science. It's so the werewolf in there's this race of snake beings, and their enemies are these wolf spirits. They have no form. They're spirits, wolf spirits. They're enemies, and then it can inhabit a person, and that turns them into a werewolf. Listen to that. Rick explained it much better than I can, but listen to that episode.
No, when you start taking the medication, you've got to take all of it. Otherwise, it's those really big pills that you got to see all the way through, or else, sure, wolf spirits, why not?
I'm going to send you the link. I'm telling you, you got to listen to. It's compelling. Rick.
I believe you.
Rick. It's the Leviathans episode. Rick brings his A game. I'm telling you, you got to listen to it.
I would love to hear it, because there's there's all that Lovecraftian stuff, and Howard's tied in with that in the Leviathans. Of course, I got my own Leviathan theories.
Oh,
that the Collinwood was built to be a command station for the Leviathans, and that Joshua was being duped by them, or was one of them.
Oh, wow.
And that it was the whole parallel time. It was built around that. It was built to be near the altar. Mm-hmm. It was built for all of that. And that we've just been awaiting this.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why they chose Barnabas, because he's the son of Joshua. And it's just one of those things Joshua never got around to telling him, because things kind of went in this direction instead. But yeah, that's my, because why would Joshua build a big mansion when he has no family and he already has a big mansion?
Yeah. Yeah.
That doesn't make any sense.
So you think Joshua was tied into all of this, or at least had some awareness of,
or was being paid, or was just duped something? There's something weird going on there. And it all centers on the parallel time room, and then the time staircase.
Yeah.
These are all tools of the Leviathans to command a multi-dimensional invasion.
Interesting. Do you think the Leviathans became aware of things like the time staircase, or do you think they orchestrated that? Do you think they manipulated?
I think they helped orchestrate.
They helped. They influenced Quentin the First and his. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. Why not? And that's just science.
Yeah.
It's what every school child knows.
Now, do you think the parallel time room is an independent? My theory has always been that time staircase and all of the time travel tore open and some gateway into parallel universes, or was the parallel time vortex always there from the beginning of time? I guess
I used to see it as a pressure valve, that it was this thing that naturally occurred. Now the way I see it is that it was a thing. It was like the center of ley lines that was just this swirling mass of weirdness, and they built the house around it. Because it also has powers of time travel and so on and so forth. I think probably Quentin the First was a little aware of something over there, and so was trying to build a mechanical version to command it and influence it. But I definitely think that it's a portal to all sorts of stuff. And my other theory is that every time, I think there's more than one parallel time room in the house. And if you look at all of the inconsistencies, which this is right up there with the original Planet of the Apes series for that, if you look at all the inconsistencies, I think at any point, Liz goes into her bedroom, she comes out into a parallel universe where suddenly everybody's talking about a pen, or there are three widows who are really important, and then she goes to bed and she gets up and nobody mentions them again. Why? Because it's like the movie, what was it? It started with a C. It's Coherence.
Okay.
Where they keep going out of the house after this comet passes by, and they wind up in other parallel houses for themselves.
Wow, interesting. Yeah.
I think that's what's going on.
Interesting. You could argue that every episode of Dark Shadows is set in a parallel version of absolutely. You should certainly make that argument. I like that you brought up ley lines too, because I agree. My friend Eric a while back put forward the theory that the very ground upon which Collinwood is built is enchanted or cursed, or so the ley lines thing fits right in with that. I mean, I think there's something about that area that isn't natural, or attracts supernatural things to it. What about, okay, so one other thing, speaking of all this time travel and everything, and I asked this question in the first episode of the podcast I ever did, and nobody ever sent in a theory. So I'm curious to hear your theory about this, because this one's always been a head scratcher. In 1840, where was the family secret, which was Barnabas? Daniel Collins was supposed to have passed it down, and ultimately Edith knows the secret in 1897 when she sees Barnabas. Do you explain it via parallel time, like this is a slightly different time band where the secret wasn't around, or was it because Daniel was kind of out of it? And then Edith is killed in 1840. She's time has been changed. Does Edith come back to life? So she was in Gerard's / Judah's. She was kind of being initiated into the cult there, for maybe she came back from the dead, or I don't know.
No, I think you're dealing with a lot of parallel universes, because there's a mystery just as vast is that when Barnabas and Stokes and Julia arrived back in 1971, Elizabeth speaks to them in a familiar manner, saying, well, it certainly was a boring winter, as if they had experienced it with her.
Yeah.
So just as big a question is, where is that Barnabas and Julia and Stokes? Are there two sets of them, or did they just kind of evaporate from reality when the prime inhabitants showed up? So the thing with Edith, the easiest explanation, well, no, I mean, she's dead. It's a different timeline. So would Quentin remember things quite the way that he did? Because he would be the one most directly affected by that. Barnabas, and Julia's an outsider, and Barnabas pre-exists all of that. So I think again, if you look at bad and go like this, there are rationalizations,
right,
for how those things happened.
Yeah.
I think
Another what's that?
Warren Odson.
Oh, I loved Warren's essays. Yeah.
So good, and that affected me more than anything else in my thinking of Dark Shadows, especially 1840 Concordance.
Yep,
the read when I was a kid, and that great essay about Angelique. So I think Warren, that's it. That was my Bible for the longest time, because
same.
That
same here.
affected my thinking so much.
But props to Kathy Rush for this, because I remember the same thing. Like they weren't in syndication, and this was pre-home video. So this was how I experienced that last year of the show. Same here. Yeah.
very grateful for that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You mentioned Barnabas coming back to 1971. That's another thing. Warren actually touches on that in his essay as well, because Barnabas went into the I Ching trance, sent his astral self back to 1840, but then in that body walks up the time staircase into the present. So
there are three of him.
There are three Barnaby.
Because there's the three Barnaby. It's like, oh yeah. I think they become a commedia dell'arte troupe.
I love it.
But the Barnaby brothers, they four if you count Julia, and she's the Chico of the group. But yeah, because you've got the one who's in the trance, you've got the one who was from 1795. And then you have the one that Elizabeth has been talking to and says, "Oh, it's such a slow winter. You guys need to show up. You know, you got to finish the pot roasting. Come on," or whatever it is. So yeah, who knows how many more? You know, you got all these people running around.
Right. Great. Warren's theory was that it was similar to what happened in 1897, where the physical body of Barnabas vanished and kind of merged with his past self, and maybe when he walked up the time staircase, you know, somehow he was returned, everything was set to rights. I don't know, that's kind of a head scratch. 1840 is a head scratch. That's that whole summer 1970, and then 1840 is just kind of like, what, I can't figure this out.
The one who is in the trance becomes Chet Collins, and he's got a redheaded wig, is real nice. And then there's like a David Soul hairdo one. And that's the one that Elizabeth's been talking to. And that's Barry Collins. And they live together, you know, in the old house. And they form a band. It's like the Monkees.
It's great.
Willie's their drummer.
Maybe they have
their manager. He's the Reuben Kincaid.
One other thing. Okay. Just before we wrap it up, if you have time, I want to talk a little bit about fandom stuff. Like, you know, we talked a little bit about, you know, what the Collinsport Historical Society has done. We talked about some of the stuff with like Kathy with the zines and the concordances. Like, what do you? How I find in recent years, and I don't want to go too heavy on this, but I find in recent years there's Dark Shadows feels like it's been on kind of on simmer mode. You know, after the Depp movie came out. And it just kind of feels like the festivals ended, and it's kind of just been on. I mean, there's still cool stuff happening, don't get me wrong, but how can we bring Dark Shadows to the public eye more, or should we? Is it better that Dark Shadows is kind of this cool underground thing that the cool kids know about, or should Dark Shadows be more visible in public eye?
Well, you know, this stuff is like evolution. You know, it's going to be as visible as there is cultural demand.
Mm-hmm.
And if there is sufficient cultural demand, I think the culture will find it.
Mm-hmm.
So if Dark Shadows is not particularly being found right now, it may be because culture doesn't have a really deep innate need that Dark Shadows is addressing.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not a smack against Dark Shadows at all. But you wonder, how do these things, you know, bubble back up into the consciousness? Some of it is due to someone picking up, like Mark Perry, picking up the ball and running with it as long and hard as they can. Some of it is someone picking up the ball and fumbling it, and the rest of us say, look, attention must be paid, and like with Johnny Depp and Tim Burton, and so we have to pick it up quite angrily and carry it for a decade. I don't really know, but I think keeping it like it's our little secret sort of thing, which I don't know anybody who does. You know, all the Dark Shadows fans I know are eager to welcome people in. So yeah, gatekeeping is the last thing we need.
Oh, definitely.
And I don't see that happening. I see Dark Shadows being very welcoming. It's just, it requires such an investment to get into.
Mm-hmm.
And thank goodness we have Tubi and we have Amazon. So the excuse of, well, I don't know where to find it, is gone. And it's up to us to sort of be, for all Dark Shadows fans, to be ambassadors to Collinwood. And it's an exciting thing to do.
I get frustrated when I pick up a book about like the history of, cultural history of horror in America, or history of vampires or something. And it's just, you get to the Dark Shadow, where Dark Shadows should be, and it just kind of just skips right on over that and keeps on going. And
it gets one sentence.
Yeah, or it gets a brief
Can't be
mention.
soap opera.
Yeah.
Then, you bring up something important, and that's this, and that's where something like the Daybook is unintentionally really important. And it's this, is that if people have, and I'm not the only one who can do it, if people have the means to pick up something theoretically funny and pithy and so on, I'm not saying I do it, but somebody out there, a book of essays that kind of explain what some of the good stuff is, then they're not beholden to watching 450 hours, that they can use this and go to Tubi and say, oh, this was kind of a fun essay. I have an idea of who these people are. Now let me watch this episode. Oh, that was good.
Yeah.
And, and that's the beauty of not having to do every Dark Shadows episode, just doing the ones I like.
Yeah.
Because you're getting the station manager. In culture, we don't have the station manager picking the 4:00 movie anymore. We don't have that sense of curators. And so getting back to that by any means necessary, and I think stuff like what you're doing, what Jules doing, and Between the Shadows and so on, is so vital for that. So I'm happy to be asked to show up for some of that stuff. It's a big honor, because I think it is important. And if Dark Shadows is going to be seen as culturally necessary, which I think it always is, it's because of things like this.
Even if you haven't really watched Dark Shadows, or you're Dark Shadows curious, I think checking out the Dark Shadows Daybook Unbound, or the original number here, the Dark Shadows Daybook, is certainly well worth your time. I think it will enrich your viewing of Dark Shadows. Reading the Daybook entry for that episode after having watched it is a really fun thing to do as well. Because it gives you some interesting insights and perspectives on the episode. So I certainly encourage people to pick up the book, either the Kindle version or the hard copy.
I have heard from a number of people who were not familiar with the show at all, who really enjoyed the Daybook. And so, especially if you are not familiar with the show, it might be a really good ambassador.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, yeah, give it a try. It's the sort of thing you don't have to know Dark Shadows to enjoy.
Yeah, awesome. And I want to just give one more shout out here. You mentioned some of the podcasts, as I did earlier, and I forgot to mention the literary license. You were on that one too when they were talking about Dark Shadows. That was a cool one too. I think they're wrapping up their Dark Shadows coverage pretty soon, but they also have been doing that for a while.
They get a shout out in the first book, and then Colonel Tom gets another shout out in this one.
Colonel Tom. Yeah, I've had him on this podcast too. We did a characters of Thayer David discussion in one of the earlier episodes. So.
A feast for all five senses.
Indeed. Well, Patrick, thank you so much for taking the time to sit down and chat with me about the Dark Shadows Daybook Unbound. And folks, remember that for the next 24 hours, Penny Dreadful special is going on. So you can pick up the Daybook using that code for 99 cents. No, do they have to put in?
No code. Just show up to Amazon. Type in Amazon Daybook Unbound.
Oh, okay.
It's for all Americans.
I don't know how these things work. Send a Sazy,
I could. It's just. Yeah, we have a culture of that.
Well, folks, if you like watching the podcast instead of listening to it, you can watch the special YouTube version of this episode. So there is a video version of this episode, as I've been doing lately with several of the episodes. So Patrick was gracious enough to agree to this video version here. So please feel free to hop on over to YouTube and watch that. Or if you're listening to the audio version of the podcast, please do subscribe. There are lots of podcast apps out there. Some of the popular ones include Apple Podcasts, iHeartRadio, Spotify. You can subscribe through any of those, Podbean, etc.
Are you on Stitcher?
I am on Stitcher. Yeah.
Stitcher.
Terror at Collinwood on Stitcher. Subscribe. Do rate and review, please, if you get the chance to do that. That does help the podcast. And also tell your friends, spread it like the dream curse. Let your friends know about the podcast. If they like Dark Shadows, or even if they like spooky stuff. I've had, like you with the Daybook, I've had several people write to me who are watching Dark Shadows for the first time and listening to the podcast and sort of getting when we talk about storylines and stuff, and then just as they're watching that storyline to get different perspectives on it. So I really appreciate that too. That's a really cool thing to hear from fans who are getting into it for the first time. So for sure. Yeah. So, well, thank you very much and have an excellent evening.
And for as long as they lived, the dark shadows never truly vanished, for there will always be terror at Collinwood. Terror at Collinwood is a Penny Dreadful production.